more generous Dark Age thresholds, a new religious belief that grants 8 gold on shrines and 16 gold on temples, and immortal settlers that get warped back to your cities instead of dying when an enemy unit steps on them. The new patch for the Better Balanced Game mod for Civ 6 has it all. Welcome to my rundown for BBG patch 6.4. Stay tuned until the end of the video for an announcement. This new patch is currently still in the beta version, so everything we'll cover here is subject to change. However, I have a lot to say about these changes, and I believe that most of them will make it into the final version of the patch, so I've decided not to wait until the full release. First, I'll speedrun covering all of the minor changes that I don't expect to make much of an impact. The policy card for 100% extra production towards support units was moved from being exclusive to communism to being available for every civ at ideology. Cotton was buffed to grant plus 4 gold instead of plus 3, and Marble now gives an additional plus 1 faith. Mobile SAMs have 5 movement points now, which is neat, but unlikely to make a real difference. Trade routes now grant a maximum of 50% extra gold from efficiency rather than 100%. In the context of trade routes, efficiency refers to the multipliers granted for having trade routes travel over water and railroads, or through mountain tunnels. This nerf mainly just means that naval civs no longer get as much extra gold on their coastal trade routes as they used to. Okay, now for the real changes in this patch. First off, the rework to the religious community's belief. This has long been known to be basically worthless as far as religious beliefs go, and so BBG has reworked it. Now, it grants plus 8 gold on shrines and plus 16 gold on temples. Bear in mind that this is a follower belief, meaning it's competing with the likes of choral music, work ethic, and feed the world. Honestly, this is a huge buff, and I expect this belief to become a staple of the meta if the patch ships with these numbers. They clearly arrived at them by taking the production work ethic grants to shrines and temples and multiplying that number by 4, using the standard 1 production equals 4 gold ratio. However, what this misses is that 4 gold is more flexible than 1 production. Unlike prod, you can spend it in any city in your empire, and it can be used to purchase tiles. The best civs for taking advantage of this will be the ones that struggled with gold before, like Arabia and Vietnam. However, this belief is strong enough that I expect any civ that likes to spam holy sites should strongly consider taking it. Next up, we have the changes to giant death robots, and these are huge. First off, the robotics technology now requires having researched composites. This also means that plastics and synthetic materials are required as well, adding 3 techs in total to the requirement. Further delaying giant death robots is the fact that they can no longer be purchased with gold, meaning players will have to actually spend several turns producing their giant death robots instead of buying them the moment they get the tech. Not only that, but this frees up gold in the late game, which no longer is funneled entirely into GDRs. This should mean we'll now see players sinking gold into upgrading units into modern armors and rocket artillery, instead of just saving for giant death robots like they did before. These units also have a longer window to shine with GDRs being pushed back by so many turns. Overall, I think this is a healthy change that spices up late game warfare. Easily the most controversial change of this patch is the fact that settlers can no longer be stolen by other players. Instead, stepping on an enemy settler will warp it back to their closest city, the same way that great people currently function. In my opinion, this change is long overdue, and only came about because the BBG developers saw how well received Civ 7's implementation of similar protections to settlers was. Now, I've seen a lot of backlash against this change, with many players saying that this rewards bad, greedy play. And frankly, I disagree. The problem with the way settler stealing worked before is that it punished good play. If we analyze the game theory here, the expected return of not escorting settlers, even before this change, is actually pretty good. Making military units to escort your settlers is extremely expensive and slows down your early game development considerably, meaning that most top players simply elected to gamble on moving their settlers unescorted and praying that opponents didn't show up and capture them. Sure, this meant that your game would be ruined instantly sometimes, but if everyone's taking this risk, it was practically required for you to take it as well if you wanted to keep up. In my opinion, this change was long overdue. Another major change is the Dark Age era score threshold being increased by 3. This means that, in online speed games in the Ancient Era, it's now possible to achieve a Dark Age with 10 era score, making it far, far easier than before. At the same time, the window for normal aging was narrowed by 3 points, meaning that the amount of era score required for a Golden Age is unchanged. Believe it or not, a Dark Age in the classical era is actually highly desirable for two reasons. The first is that it grants access to the isolationism policy card, which grants +2 food and +2 production on all internal trade routes, massively accelerating your early game. The second reason is that going from a Dark Age in one era immediately into a Golden Age in the next triggers what's known as a Heroic Age, allowing the player to choose 3 Golden Age dedications instead of just one. This means that a player who goes Dark Age first can gain access to Pen, Brush, and Voice, Free Inquiry, and their choice of either Monumentality or Drums of War in the medieval era. The only reason players never went for Dark Ages in the past is that it was devastating if you accidentally overshot and achieved a Normal Age. Normal Ages come with none of the benefits of either a Dark Age or a Golden Age, and are extremely undesirable as a result. Now that Normal Ages are easier to avoid, I expect to see some players deliberately trying to force a Dark Age first. The main way you go about doing this is simply by avoiding doing much scouting, as scouting is the main way you gain era score in the Ancient Era. Instead of 2 scouts into 2 settlers, you can open with 1 scout into a settler, or a builder into a settler instead. The best civs for trying to force a Dark Age are the ones with a lot of trade route capacity and enough culture to compensate for lacking the Pen, Brush, and Voice Golden Age dedication. Immediately, 3 leaders come to mind for me. The first is Joa, who gains an extra trade route capacity on turn 1 and a second on turn 31, perfectly positioning the civ to abuse the isolationism policy card extremely well. The second is Cyrus, who gains an extra trade route capacity at the Political Philosophy Civic and gains extra culture on internal trade routes. The third is Ludwig, who gains extra culture simply for placing wonders, even if he doesn't actually finish constructing them. The main reason this leader is particularly good with the Dark Age first is because of how strongly Germany synergizes with the Heroic Age in the medieval era. The extra district slot Germany unlocks at the Guild Civic grants them more districts for more Pen, Brush, and Voice value, and the Civ also wants to place a commercial hub in every city, benefiting Free Inquiry. This Civ can easily snowball out of control if you can achieve a Dark Age into a Heroic Age when playing it, and I expect a lot of people to give this a try. Okay, now let's get on to the Civ changes. First off, the leaders Gitarja and Saladin Sultan are getting some light reworks. Historically, they've been too strong in teamers on account of their powerful war bonuses and too weak in free-for-all games on account of their lack of simming bonuses, and these changes seek to address that. Saladin Sultan's previous ability of doubling support and flanking bonuses has been replaced with a weaker +5 combat strength on units adjacent to apostles. In exchange, he now gains the ability to faith purchase campus and encampment buildings, a pseudo-hybrid of Jezo Education and Valletta's Suzerain bonus. This will help him immensely in allowing this leader to compete with his other persona, Saladin Vizier, which has long overshadowed him in free-for-all games. With respect to Gitarja, power is being taken out of her incredible Zhong unique unit in order to make room for some buffs to her simming ability. Zhongs are now more expensive and are unlocked later than previously. In exchange, the Indonesian leader now gains +2 faith per turn on all districts, including city centers, which are placed on or adjacent to coast, replacing the old bonus which merely granted +2 faith on coastal cities. Furthermore, she can now purchase harbor buildings with faith. In my view, Indonesia just went from being one of the most unexciting free-for-all civs in the game to one with a strong, interesting identity. I don't know exactly where these changes will land this leader, but I highly doubt she'll be wallowing around in F tier anymore. The Incan civilization has been buffed by granting it the ability to ignore the yield penalties from negative amenities on all cities. Frankly, this change is extremely hard for me to predict the impact of. On one hand, it allows the player to settle endless amounts of cities and grow them to immense populations by spamming Inca's unique terrace farms with reckless abandon. On the other hand, I'm not actually sure that this ultra-wide, ultra-populous playstyle is actually going to be stronger than the more conventional, amenity-focused approach where the player manages the size of their empire to keep their cities ecstatic. This will require some testing on my part, and I'm excited to play around with this leader and figure out how far this playstyle can be pushed. Next up is a small change to Rome, as the bonus that grants free roads to the capital was moved from the Civ bonuses to being attached to the leader of Caesar. This is effectively just a small nerf to Trajan. I don't expect it to make a huge impact. Sweden is getting a light rework, no longer gaining extra yields for having cities settled on desert, tundra, and snow, and having the Diplo favor from recruiting great people reduced to a mere 5 points per great person. However, in exchange, the Queen's Bibliothèque can now store any 6 great works instead of being limited to 2 great works of writing, 2 of art, and 2 of music, allowing the player to theme this unique building without needing to recruit a great musician first. Furthermore, Tier 1 Gov Plaza buildings grant 2 writer points, Tier 2 buildings grant 2 artist points, and Tier 3 buildings grant 2 musician points. Overall, I think that Sweden's a fair bit stronger than before, but this isn't likely enough to catapult it into being a high priority pick. Next up, Kublai Khan has had his extra trade route yields reduced. Previously, he'd gained +1 science and culture on international trade routes and a further 1 of each for every 20 tiles his traders traveled. Now, this has been nerfed to require 25 tiles for the extra yields. Honestly, I don't like this change. At this point, it's becoming extremely difficult to ever achieve the distance on traders necessary to gain more than 2 extra science and culture on traders, let alone 3. The power fantasy for this leader feels pretty dead right now, in my opinion. Speaking of power fantasies, Aztec has finally been nerfed, and honestly, I'm amazed it took this long. Now, Montezuma's combat bonus will only apply to melee, ranged, and anti-cavalry units instead of all military units. Make no mistake, this is a pretty hefty nerf. Heavy cavalry make up the bulk of most land militaries throughout the game, and the late game is mostly dominated by planes and giant death robots. Being forced to use weaker units in order to take advantage of the Civ's combat bonuses greatly diminishes their usefulness. Honestly, I expect this leader to fall from being an S tier FFA Civ to being a high B tier at best. Next up are some changes to the Civilization of Congo, with several of the leader bonuses for Movember being rolled into the Civ itself. This represents a significant buff to the other leader for the Civ, Mbande. Now, she too can enjoy extra yields on relics and free relics upon finishing government plaza buildings. This is significant, as unlike Movember, she can actually found a religion, meaning she can take advantage of these bonuses by going for the Reliquaries belief that triples relics faith and tourism yields. IMO, this buff is actually overkill. In my opinion, Mbande has long been one of the most underrated civs by the competitive community, especially in the context of free-for-all games. I think that this pushes an already great leader a bit over the line, and I look forward to trying to prove this by playing Mbande whenever I get the chance. Mvemba, on the other hand, gets a relatively minor buff. Now, his great generals ignore woods and jungle movement penalties. This will be pretty impactful for early game pushes with his unique unit in the context of teamers, but in free-for-all games where early game warfare is terrible, this change is basically a nothing burger. That wraps up the patch notes for BBG 6.4. Overall, I'd say that this patch demonstrates a massive shift in the philosophy of the mod developers. In the past, the mod has been designed almost entirely around competitive 4v4 teamers games, but now it feels like we're finally getting a significant number of changes geared directly towards the free-for-all experience. The removal of settler stealing, the loosening of the Dark Age era score threshold, and the reworks of Guitarja and Salad and Sultan, all of these represent major steps towards considering the balance of the free-for-all format, which has until now been neglected. Now, an announcement. Next Saturday, I'll be playing in a competitive invitational show match showing off the new BBG patch. This match consists of 10 of the top players from CPL and has a $150 winner-takes-all prize attached to it. Unlike all of the tournament games I've played until now, this one will not be reported in CPL, meaning that there are no ELO adjustments to influence players' decisions. For the first time, there is literally, absolutely, conclusively zero difference between being second place and getting last place. For those of you who are tired of seeing players give up when someone else gets too far ahead in free-for-all games, or seeing players fight each other solely for a higher position instead of playing for the win, this is the game you've been waiting for. Furthermore, the draft format is totally new. In previous tournaments, players were typically asked to ban 1 civ each, and then were all given a pool of 6 civs to choose from. Now, players instead submit a list of any 4 civs that they want to play to the tournament organizer, sorted from the civ they most want to play to the civ they least want to play. To start with, each player's first choices are compared to each other. If any two players chose the same civ, it's banned, and we consider their second pick instead. This process repeats itself until no new civs are banned, and then players are locked in to their top remaining choice. If all of a player's preferred picks are banned, they'll simply get to choose from all remaining civs. This format is exciting because there's way less randomness involved than in the previous FFA tournaments I've played in. First off, there's actually enough bans to go around for all of the top tier threats to potentially be taken out of the pool, meaning that there won't be any one player on an obviously overpowered civ. Secondly, every player is now on completely even footing and can choose from any civ that isn't banned, meaning that we'll get to see all of these top tier players at their best, with players being able to all pick something they're comfortable and experienced on. I'd like to give a big shout out to the organizer of the event, Auko, for putting together such an interesting format. If you want to see a spectator point of view for the game, you can follow his Twitch account at the link I've added to the description of this video. Of course, you can also tune into my Twitch stream of the game at 2 PM EST on Saturday, April 12th. Thanks for watching to the end of the video. That's all for now. Herson signing out.